This is the account of a legendary sniper capable of eliminating a target from several kilometers away, even while blindfolded. Yet, this sniper was once nothing more than an ordinary mathematics teacher. He despised war and harbored a deep aversion to firearms. But one day, an event transpired that transformed him from a respectable educator into a merciless marksman. The narrative opens in a small Ukrainian village, where we see a modest dwelling. Inside this home lives a couple, contentedly passing their days in Ukraine. The man residing here is named Mykola, and his wife is called Nastia. Nastia was a sketch artist who also carved various figurines from wood. Mykola is an instructor, teaching mathematics to children at a nearby school. He conducts his lessons at the school. He is an exceptional educator, and all the pupils are quite fond of him, except for one boy named Avon. Avon was an extremely ill-behaved child. He would harass his teacher, Mykola, at school each day. Avon hailed from a wealthy household, whereas Mykola was a man of modest means. His goal was for Mykola to grow weary of his insolence and strike him. Then Avon would lodge a complaint and have Mykola dismissed from the school. Mykola remained unaffected by his taunts and continued to find joy in his existence. Due to the lack of any electronic devices like a television in his home, Mykola was cut off from world events. One day, while Mykola was at his school, he caught a news bulletin on a TV stating that Russia had assaulted Ukraine, resulting in numerous military casualties and the Russian seizure of several Ukrainian territories. That evening, upon returning home, Mykola learned that his wife was expecting a child. He was overjoyed by this revelation, for Mykola was now on the verge of fatherhood. The two of them celebrated this happy news together. The following day, Mykola bid his wife farewell and departed on his bicycle to instruct the children at school. However, en route, he observed two soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms standing with lit cigarettes. The uniform was decidedly not that of the Ukrainian forces, which struck him as somewhat peculiar. But Mykola reasoned that perhaps the government had simply updated the soldiers' attire. Therefore, Mykola did not dwell on the matter and swiftly arrived at his school. But upon entering the building, he discovered the entire school deserted. Not a single child had shown up for class. This sight troubled him deeply. He then saw a television broadcast reporting that Russian troops had advanced into Ukraine to seize control. And now he understood that the soldiers he had spotted earlier were indeed from Russia. With this realization, anxiety for his wife gripped him, as she was home alone. He immediately mounted his bicycle and raced toward his house, but it was already too late. When Mykola arrived home, he witnessed the two soldiers brutally assaulting his wife. Mykola attempted to intervene, but the soldiers began beating him as well. He pleaded with them, crying, "Please, stop hitting us. My wife is pregnant." But the soldiers ignored his pleas and continued to batter them both. After some time, one of the Russian soldiers ransacked Mykola's house. Finding nothing of value inside, he flew into a rage, set the house ablaze, and prepared to leave. Seeing her home engulfed in flames, Nastia was seized by fury. She grabbed a stone and began hurling it at the Russian soldiers. In response, one of the soldiers fired his weapon, and Nastia perished instantly. The ground beneath Mykola's feet seemed to dissolve as he watched his wife die before his very eyes. He rushed to her side, gathered her in his arms, and wept inconsolably. A few hours later, two Ukrainian soldiers arrived at the tragic scene. Witnessing Mykola's deceased wife, they were filled with profound grief. They placed a hand on Mykola's shoulder and urged him not to abandon hope. Following this, the two soldiers commenced digging a grave for Nastia. Once the grave was prepared, they instructed Mykola to lay his wife to rest there. He was now entirely alone. Those Russian soldiers had not only murdered his spouse but had also annihilated his life. They had torched his home and killed his unborn child. Now Mykola was consumed by a fire for vengeance. He had resolved to kill the Russian soldier who had shot his wife, no matter the cost. The sole path to retribution lay in enlisting with the Ukrainian military. Thus, he entreated those two soldiers. "Please take me with you. I wish to join the Ukrainian army." The soldiers consented and transported Mykola to their military installation in their vehicle. Before departing, Mykola retrieved a small wooden figurine crafted by his wife, one she had carved to safeguard him. Upon reaching the military base, their commanding officer grew irate upon seeing Mykola. He refused to induct him, suspecting Mykola might be an infiltrator. But after the senior officer received a full briefing on Mykola from the two soldiers, Mykola recounted his entire ordeal. He described how the Russian soldiers had savagely murdered his wife, his unborn child, and incinerated his home. Moved by this account, the senior officer relented and agreed to enlist Mykola as a soldier. The next day, Mykola's instruction commenced. He had devoted his life to mathematics and possessed no familiarity with firearms. When the other soldiers were assembling their rifles, Mykola lagged far behind, completing his assembly last. Observing this, the officer felt Mikola would never evolve into a competent soldier, yet Mikola persevered and concentrated intently on his regimen. One evening during a training exercise, Mikola requested his superior to refrain from using his real name, stating his codename was Raven. Upon hearing the name Raven, the others erupted in laughter. The senior officer explained that codenames are not casually acquired. A soldier must perform remarkable deeds for the nation to merit one. Mikola did not take this rebuff negatively and instead intensified his efforts. He practiced deep into the night while the other soldiers slumbered. One day, the senior officer announced a shortage of snipers and the necessity to augment their ranks to counter the Russian threat. He inquired who among them aspired to be a sniper. Several soldiers stepped forward, and Mikola was counted among them, for he too desired the role. When the others saw Mikola volunteer, they snickered once more. The senior officer informed him that he was not yet prepared for sniper duty, as he could not even assemble and disassemble a rifle correctly. Mikola insisted he could excel as a sniper and merely required an opportunity to demonstrate his capability. To evaluate him, the senior officer challenged Mikola to assemble the rifle within 20 seconds. To prove his merit, Mikola blindfolded himself, disassembled the weapon, and then reassembled it. He accomplished the task in a mere 18 seconds. All present were astounded by Mikola's swiftness and adroitness. Those who had mocked him previously now burst into applause. The senior officer, duly impressed, enrolled Mikola in sniper training. During this phase, Mikola was issued an antiquated rifle model while the others received state-of-the-art arms. Mikola requested a modern rifle, but the senior officer stated he would have to earn it by proving his worth. Left with no alternative, Mikola accepted the dated weapon and pressed on. The senior officer instructed that regardless of the circumstances a sniper confronts, he must not shift even a millimeter from his post and must remain fixed on his objective. To drill this principle, the senior officer discharged rounds perilously close to the trainees. Any sniper who flinched from his position was immediately dismissed from the program. When it was Mikola's turn, he remained utterly motionless and held his aim steady. In this manner, he withstood the trial and advanced through sniper training. In the subsequent exercise, the snipers were permitted only a fleeting glimpse of their targets before their eyes were covered with blindfolds. During this drill, they were required to estimate and fire upon their target. Some of the other soldiers succeeded in this test, but when Mikola's turn arrived, his shot strayed slightly off the mark, and he failed the exercise due to the imprecision of his antiquated firearm. Nevertheless, everyone recognized that had Mikola been equipped with a modern rifle, he would have struck the bullseye with certainty. The next phase of training proved even more arduous for the snipers, as they were tasked with hitting targets solely by the illumination of flares amidst the pitch-black night. The senior officer launched a flare, and everyone took aim, yet none managed to connect with the target. The rest had all discharged their rounds, but Mikola had not. He realized that aiming directly using the flare's glare was impossible. Therefore, when the senior officer released another flare, instead of shooting immediately, Mikola leveraged the flare's brief light to calculate the distance to his target. Employing his mathematical acumen, he executed a flawless shot. Observing this feat, the senior officer and the rest of the soldiers were dumbfounded. No one had ever successfully completed this task before, only Mikola had achieved it. The senior officer was profoundly impressed and bestowed upon him the coveted codename, Raven. Finally, the day came when the outcomes of his training were to be declared. The colonel saluted Mikola and informed him that he had successfully passed the evaluation. A few days afterward, the colonel approached Mikola once more and instructed him to gather his gear, as they were embarking on an operation. Intelligence indicated that Russian soldiers had seized a checkpoint. Just as they were preparing to engage the Russian soldiers, a vehicle was spotted approaching the checkpoint. The colonel issued an immediate order to hold fire. On the other side, the Russian soldiers halted the vehicle and ordered the occupants to exit. They scrutinized their passports and searched the entire automobile. When the occupants requested the return of their documents, the Russian soldiers beat them savagely. Witnessing this brutality, the colonel commanded his men to open fire. In a synchronized instant, all the snipers took their shots and neutralized their respective targets. Thus, their inaugural mission concluded successfully. Upon returning to base after the operation, Mikola observed that many of his comrades were absent. He grew anxious and inquired, "Where are the rest of my fellow soldiers?" He was informed that the others had been dispatched on a separate assignment. The next day, Mikola received the devastating news that numerous comrades had been killed during the mission they had undertaken. They had all been eliminated by a Russian sniper. That sniper's name was Siri, and he was reputed to be the premier marksman in Russia. A few days elapsed in this manner, and Mikola departed for his next assignment alongside his squad. Upon reaching the site, they laid mines throughout the area and took up their firing positions. After a brief wait, Russian troops arrived at the location, and among them was Avon, the very same boy who had tormented Mikola back in school. Avon had since enlisted in the Russian military. As soon as the colonel issued the command to fire, Mikola hesitated, reluctant to take the life of his former pupil. But then Mikola suppressed his sentiment and shot at the landmines planted nearby. A massive detonation ensued, wiping out the Russian soldiers, Avon included. Once the situation was contained, the colonel angrily confronted Mikola, demanding, "What were you contemplating when I gave the order to shoot?" Mikola replied, "One of my students was among those Russian soldiers. I did not wish to kill him." The colonel counseled Mikola, explaining that he should not lament Avon's demise. He stated, "Here, he was not your pupil. He was your adversary. Joining the Russian forces was his own choice, so you need carry no guilt for him." After completing the assignment, they all returned to their base camp. The following morning, they set out for their subsequent operation. This mission held great significance, as they had received word that a contingent of Russian soldiers would be traversing that particular route. The colonel and Mikola swiftly reached the site and settled into their positions. After a while, they identified 2 Russian soldiers awaiting the arrival of their unit. Mikola then noticed that one of those soldiers was the very man who had shot his wife, and that man now lay squarely within his crosshairs. Mikola sought permission to fire, but the colonel denied his request. Mikola's fury began to mount, for the man standing before him was the murderer of his spouse. He had joined the military for this precise moment to exact revenge for her death. He again requested authorization to shoot, but the colonel refused once more. Unable to contain his surging emotions any longer, Mikola squeezed the trigger. The soldier died on the spot, but the grievous consequence was that the Russian forces now had a fix on their location. The colonel whirled toward Mikola and shouted, but the worst had already transpired. Russia's deadliest sniper, known as Siri, was also in position and now knew precisely where they were. The colonel sensed Siri's proximity and began scanning frantically for him. Before he could pinpoint Siri's whereabouts, Siri fired a lethal headshot, and the colonel perished instantaneously. Only then did Mikola grasp the magnitude of his catastrophic blunder. The colonel had forfeited his life because of Mikola's error. He hoisted the colonel's body and began retreating from their compromised post. He successfully extricated himself from hostile territory and made his way back to base. Mikola was shattered by the colonel's death and held himself wholly accountable. He swore an oath to eliminate Siri and avenge the colonel. Soon, Mikola received intelligence regarding the location of 2 Russian snipers, and he promptly departed for his next operation. He arrived at the location, settled into position, and took aim. Before long, he successfully neutralized one of the snipers. During his recovery, he received a communication from the army major, who informed Mikola that they had positively identified the sniper responsible for the colonel's death. Following this, Mikola returned to base, where the major commenced a detailed briefing regarding the enemy sniper. The major stated that the sniper's identity was Siri and that he was considered Russia's foremost sharpshooter. The major elaborated that Siri's modus operandi involved first killing Ukrainian soldiers and subsequently uploading footage of the executions to social media in order to demoralize Ukrainian forces. He described Siri as a sniper who typically refrained from relocating, preferring to hunt his prey from a single, fixed position. The strategy was now formulated. They would approach Siri's location using 2 separate units. According to the plan, the first unit would engage the Russian soldiers head-on, and while they were thus preoccupied, the second unit would strike from the rear. Upon arrival, all snipers assumed their concealed posts and trained their sights on the objective. Simultaneously, Mikola surreptitiously entered the building, where he encountered 2 Russian soldiers deep in conversation. Without hesitation, Mikola eliminated both and advanced further into the edifice. Mikola then signaled his team in accordance with the plan. As soon as the signal was received, the snipers positioned outside unleashed a volley of fire, cutting down the Russian soldiers. Elsewhere, Siri noted that none of his comrades were responding to his radio checks. Sensing something amiss, he proceeded to the building's rooftop. A Russian sniper was already stationed on the roof, but upon reaching him, Siri discovered the man was dead. Panic surged through Siri as he realized Ukrainian forces had encircled him from every direction. He contacted his base to request immediate reinforcements, but was informed that backup would not arrive for another 10 minutes. Upon hearing this, Siri hastened back to his firing position and frantically began scanning for Ukrainian soldiers. His gaze then fell upon a small statuette placed on the table before him. It was the very same figurine Mikola had left there, the one carved by Mikola's wife. Before Siri could react, Mikola lunged at him and stabbed him to death. The scuffle alerted another sniper within the building, putting him on heightened alert. Before that sniper could act, Mikola lobbed a grenade in his direction, and the sniper was obliterated in the resulting blast. Sometime later, the reinforcement unit Siri had summoned also reached the building, oblivious to the fact that Siri was already dead. The Ukrainian soldiers unleashed a blistering torrent of gunfire, systematically eliminating the Russians one after another. A few days subsequent to this operation, Mikola visited his wife's gravesite. He felt that the vow he had made to her had now been honored, for he had slain all those culpable for the murders of his wife and the colonel. Here, Nicola swore that he would continue to defend his nation until his final breath, and with those words, he departed. And thus, the film concludes. If you enjoyed the presentation, please subscribe.